The rain was coming down in cold gray sheets when I first saw her sitting there on the wet concrete. My daughter Grace, my only child, wrapped in a torn denim jacket 3 sizes too large for her body, holding a tiny bundle against her chest. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips were faintly blue, and when she finally lifted her eyes to mine, she whispered 4 words that shattered something inside me forever. "Dad, please forgive me." 6 months earlier, no one who knew our family would have believed our lives could arrive at that moment. To understand how my only daughter ended up begging strangers for baby formula outside a discount grocery store in Toledo, I have to take you back to the beginning. My name is Daniel Hayes. I am 68 years old, and I live in a small town called Millbrook, Indiana. Population 4,000 and change. Tucked between 2 rivers and a long stretch of soybean fields that never really seems to change from one decade to the next. I drive a 1994 Ford pickup truck the color of dried mud. I own an old black Labrador named Chester who follows me from room to room and sleeps at the foot of my bed with his chin resting on my boot. Every morning at 5:30 in the morning, I put the coffee on, feed Chester his kibble, and walk the 4 blocks down to Molly's Diner on Main Street, where I sit in the same corner booth by the window and eat the same 2 eggs over easy with wheat toast and a side of grits. The waitress, a woman named Ruth, who has known me for 31 years, never asks me what I want. She just brings it, pours my coffee black, tells me the weather, and moves on to the next table. To everyone in Millbrook, I am a retired freight yard supervisor. A quiet man who fixes fence posts for the neighbors, mows the church lawn every other Saturday morning, and keeps mostly to himself. What most people in this town never knew, what I never once brought up in casual conversation, is that before I ever spent a single day at a freight yard, I served 22 years as a criminal investigator with the Army Criminal Investigation Division. I worked cases in 3 combat zones. I closed files on colonels and generals who thought their rank made them untouchable. I testified in more military tribunals than I care to count on both hands. When I hung up the uniform at 48 years old, I placed my medals and my citations in a cedar chest at the foot of my bed, and I closed the lid, and I did not open it again. That chapter of my life was over. I wanted the second half of my time on earth to be quiet, ordinary, and full of small mercies. My wife Helen and I bought our little white farmhouse when our daughter Grace was 3 years old. Helen was the smart one in our marriage, the strong one, the wise one, the one who could look at any hard thing and see straight through the middle of it before I had even figured out where to start. She had a saying she would repeat every single time our family faced trouble. She would set her chipped blue coffee mug down on the kitchen table, look at me with those steady green eyes, and she would say, "Daniel, silence is only golden when it is guarding the truth. The rest of the time, silence is just a coward's coat." Those words shaped the man I tried to become for the rest of my life. 6 years ago, Helen was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She fought hard for 22 months. She fought with the same quiet steel she had brought to every hard thing our family had ever faced. She died on a Tuesday morning in April with her hand curled inside mine and Grace asleep in the plastic chair beside the hospital bed. The silence after Helen died was a physical thing that pressed against my ribs. It sat with me when I made coffee for 1 person instead of 2. It followed me into the truck when I drove into town. It settled across from me at the kitchen table where her chair stood empty for months before I could bring myself to move it against the wall. Grace was 16 years old the year her mother died, and she stepped into a kind of strength no teenage girl should ever have to find on her own. She kept the family calendar on the refrigerator with color-coded markers. She reminded me to eat when I forgot for a whole day. She learned to make pot roast on Sundays exactly the way Helen had taught her, with the pearl onions cut in half and the carrots left whole. For years, Grace and I held each other up because there was nobody else in the whole world left to do the holding. Grace grew into the kind of young woman her mother would have been proud to have raised. She had Helen's steady green eyes and Helen's gentle hands and my stubborn jaw. She earned a full scholarship to study nursing at a state college up in Fort Wayne. She graduated with honors when she was 21 years old. She took a job at a small community hospital about an hour north of Millbrook, and for a while, Every Sunday afternoon, she would drive down and sit on my back porch with a tall glass of sweet tea while Chester rested his gray muzzle across her knee. Those Sunday afternoons were the closest thing I ever had to peace after Helen was gone from the house. Then Grace met Marcus Whitmore. I want to be fair to the truth here at the start because the truth deserves that much respect. When Grace first brought Marcus home for Sunday dinner, I tried very hard to like him. He was 36 years old at the time. He was tall and broad through the shoulders with the kind of quick, easy smile that seemed to work on every waitress, every doorman, every stranger it ever met. He worked in what he called wealth management, some firm out of Indianapolis with a name that sounded more like a law office than a place that handled money. He drove a silver German sedan that he parked carefully at the end of my driveway so the tires would not sit on my grass. He brought a bottle of expensive red wine that I had never heard of in my life and a small bouquet of white roses for Grace. He shook my hand with a firm grip, looked me square in the eye, and called me sir 3 times before we even sat down at the table. Over that first dinner, Marcus told stories that made Grace laugh in a way I had not seen her laugh in years. He asked me questions about the freight yard, listened carefully to the answers, and remembered them later in the evening. When he stood up to help clear the plates, he insisted on washing every dish himself, while Grace and I sat out on the porch watching the fireflies rise over the yard. My daughter was glowing that night. She looked at me across the porch railing and she said, "Dad, isn't he wonderful?" I told her he seemed like a decent man. I told her I was happy for her, and in that moment, I meant every word of it. But something was off. It was small, and I could not name it right away, and I did not trust it enough at first to say the words out loud. It was in the way Marcus held Grace's hand a beat too tightly when she started to disagree with him about something small at the dinner table. It was in the way his eyes went cold for 1/2 second when I asked what his parents did for a living before the warmth came flooding back over his face like a curtain being drawn. It was in the way he gently corrected, the way Grace pronounced certain words, playfully, always in front of me, always with a laugh, but always doing it. My gut had been trained over 22 years to notice the small tells that most people miss, and my gut was starting to talk to me from a distance. Marcus and Grace were engaged 3 months after they met. They were married 4 months after that in a small ceremony at a lakeside inn about an hour outside Indianapolis. I gave my daughter away wearing a gray suit I had bought 15 years earlier for the funeral of an old Army friend. When the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, I said the words, but I felt Helen sitting in the empty chair beside me, and I could almost hear her voice inside my ear. Silence is only golden when it is guarding the truth, Daniel. If this story is already starting to sit in your chest the way it sat in mine that day, I hope you will stay with me all the way to the end. Subscribe to this channel so that more stories like this one can reach the people who need them the most tonight. Every single subscriber helps another quiet father find the courage he did not know he still had inside him. The first Christmas after the wedding, Marcus and Grace hosted the family dinner at their new house outside Indianapolis. It was a 2-story brick colonial in a gated neighborhood with lawns that looked painted onto the ground and mailboxes that all matched each other in exactly the same shade of dark green. I drove up in my old Ford pickup wearing a heavy wool sweater Helen had knitted for me the last winter before she got sick. Marcus met me at the front door and his eyes dropped to my work boots for one long moment before the smile arrived. As I walked past him into the foyer, I heard him mutter something quiet to Grace behind me. "Sweetheart, next time maybe just remind him about the shoe policy." Grace's face went pink. She looked down at her hands. She said nothing at all. That was the first micro-humiliation. There would be many more before the year was out. At the dinner table that Christmas, Marcus poured a very expensive red wine for his own friends and their wives. Then he reached across me to pour a glass for Grace, and he asked me if I would prefer a bottle of beer, since I probably was not familiar with vintages of this quality. His friends laughed politely into their napkins. Grace laughed too, though her laugh sounded like a small animal caught in a fence. I said a beer would be just fine. I said the wine glass would probably break in my hands anyway from the sheer weight of it. His friends laughed again, louder this time, and Marcus smiled at me the way a landlord smiles at a tenant who is 2 months behind on rent. I ate my meal in silence. I answered questions when they were asked directly. I helped clear the plates when the meal was over. And on the long drive back to Millbrook that night, alone in the truck with the heater ticking and the black road stretching in front of me under a cold winter moon, I thought about Helen's words. Silence is only golden when it is guarding the truth. I was not guarding the truth yet. I was only measuring it. The second incident came 4 months later, in the middle of a warm April afternoon. Grace had asked me to come up to their house and help her hang some family photographs she had finally gotten around to framing. I drove up with Chester in the passenger seat and my toolbox in the bed of the truck. Marcus was on a long business call in the study when I arrived. I let myself in through the kitchen side door. Grace was standing at the marble counter, and she was holding her left wrist with her right hand, and there was a purple mark the size of a thumb pressed into her pale skin just below the bone. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she pulled her sweater sleeve down so fast the fabric made a small snapping sound in the quiet kitchen. "Dad, you are early. I was just about to make you some coffee." Her voice was too bright. It cracked at the edges. I set my toolbox down on the tile floor very carefully. My hands were suddenly steady in a way they had not been steady in a lot of years. "Grace, what happened to your wrist?" She waved me off. She laughed a small, brittle laugh that did not belong to my daughter. "Oh, Dad, I banged it on the corner of a cabinet last night. You know how clumsy I am when I am tired." She turned toward the coffee pot. She did not look at me. I did not press her that afternoon. I hung the photographs on the walls the way she wanted them hung. I drank the coffee. I hugged my daughter tight at the door, and I drove back down the interstate to Millbrook with Chester dozing in the passenger seat. That night, sitting alone on my back porch, with Chester at my feet and the fireflies starting to blink over the yard, I felt something old and cold settle into the base of my spine. I had felt that same exact cold once before in my life, in a small stone building outside Frankfurt in the winter of 1992, right before I closed the biggest case of my whole career. That cold was the sound of a decision being made somewhere below my thoughts, in the deep, quiet place where soldiers keep their promises. The third incident came at Grace's birthday dinner in the middle of July. Marcus took the three of us to a steakhouse in downtown Indianapolis, the kind of place with dark wood paneling on the walls, low, warm lighting, and prices printed in tiny gray letters on a menu without any dollar signs at all. Our waiter that night was a young man of maybe 22 years old, thin as a rail, nervous, and clearly new to the job. When he brought Marcus his ribeye steak, Marcus cut into it right at the center, took one bite, and set his silver fork down flat on the plate. "This is overcooked. I asked for medium rare. This is medium." His voice was quiet, but every set of eyes at the two neighboring tables snapped toward us like magnets. "Sir, I am so sorry. I can absolutely take it back to the kitchen and get you a new one right away. No problem at all." The boy's hands were shaking around his little notepad. "What is your name, son?" "My name is Nathan." "Nathan, do you understand how much this steak costs at this restaurant? Do you understand how much I am paying for this evening?" The boy's face turned the color of chalk. "Sir, I understand. I will get you a new one right away." "See that you do, Nathan." And when I ask for medium rare is not a suggestion, it is an instruction. I watched Marcus lean back in his leather chair, satisfied with himself, and I watched my daughter Grace stare down at her lap the whole time. I watched the boy Nathan carry the plate back toward the kitchen with his shoulders hunched forward like he had been struck across the back of the neck. That was the moment I understood. A man who will humiliate a waiter over a slightly overcooked piece of meat will humiliate his wife for far less than that. Character does not choose an audience. Character is what a man really is when he thinks nobody who matters is watching him. I said nothing at the table that night. I kissed my daughter on the forehead when the dinner was finally over. I drove the 90 miles home to Millbrook with the radio off and my hands wrapped tight around the steering wheel. The fourth thing I noticed was the weight loss. Every time Grace came home for a Sunday visit through that autumn, she was thinner. Her cheekbones grew sharper. Her wrists grew smaller inside the sleeves of her sweaters. Her skin lost the pink flush it had carried since childhood. When I asked her if she was eating, she smiled and told me she was just busy with work at the hospital. When I asked her if she was happy, she told me marriage was harder than she had expected, but that she loved Marcus very much and everything was fine. She said the word fine the way people say the word fine when the house is on fire and they do not want the neighbors to look. Then came the fifth thing, the quietest and worst thing of all. Grace stopped coming for Sunday visits altogether. First, it was one Sunday because of a work conflict. Then 2 Sundays because Marcus had a family event. Then 3 Sundays with no explanation offered at all. Then a whole month passed. Then 2 whole months. I would call the house phone and Marcus would answer, always polite, always warm, always with some smooth reason why Grace could not come to the phone right at that particular moment. She will call you back, Dad. She is just in the shower. She is just running to the pharmacy. She is just at the grocery store. And Grace never called me back, not once. I want to pause here right at the center of this story, and I want to ask you something directly. Before I continue with what happened next, take one moment right now and drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from tonight. I read every single one of them. And knowing that fathers and mothers and daughters and sons all over this country and all over the world are listening to these stories is what keeps me telling them, where are you watching from tonight? I want to hear from you. The detonating incident, the thing that finally pulled me out of watching and into action, happened on a cold Tuesday afternoon in the first week of November. I had driven up to Toledo, Ohio to attend the funeral of an old Army buddy who had finally lost his long fight with lung cancer. His widow, a kind woman named Clara, had asked me to serve as one of the pallbearers. The service was at a small Methodist church on the south side of the city. Afterwards, driving back toward the interstate in a cold, gray November rain, my windshield wiper on the driver's side tore loose against the glass and began slapping the frame. I pulled off the road into the parking lot of a discount grocery store on Route 20 to buy a replacement blade. That is when I saw her. She was sitting on an upturned plastic milk crate against the dirty brick wall by the sliding glass doors of the store. She was wearing a men's denim jacket 3 sizes too large for her body, the elbows torn out completely, the cuffs frayed and blackened. Her dark brown hair was matted and unwashed. Her cheeks were hollowed out down to the bone. Her lips were faintly blue from the cold. In her lap, she held a tiny bundle wrapped in a faded yellow receiving blanket, and she was saying the same 3 words over and over again to every stranger who walked past her toward the door. Please, just formula. Please, just formula. Please, just formula. I stopped walking. My plastic bag with a wiper blade inside slipped out of my hand and hit the wet gravel with a small thud. My daughter Grace lifted her head, and her eyes met mine across 10 feet of rain and asphalt, and her whole face collapsed in on itself all at once. She did not run. She did not try to hide. She just started shaking her head back and forth, whispering the word no over and over like a small prayer nobody was going to answer. I crossed that parking lot in 8 long strides. I fell to my knees on the wet asphalt in front of her. Beneath that oversized denim jacket, she was skin and bone. In her arms, a tiny baby girl with a full head of dark brown hair opened her eyes and blinked slowly up at the gray Ohio sky. My granddaughter, a granddaughter I had never known existed until that exact moment, Grace. My voice would not come out above a hoarse whisper. Grace, what has happened to you? She buried her face against my wet shoulder and she wept. She wept in a way I had only heard once before in my whole life, from a woman standing over the body of her only son at a base hospital in Kandahar in the summer of 2007. It was the sound of a person who had run out of every option except grief. Dad, she sobbed against the collar of my coat. He told me you did not want to see me anymore. He told me you said terrible things about me. He told me you had a stroke and you were in a nursing home and you did not remember my name. He told me so many things, Dad, and I believed him. I believed him for so long. And then he took everything I had left, and he drove me here, and he left me on this sidewalk with the baby and $20 in cash. I did not say another word in that parking lot. I picked up my daughter. I picked up my granddaughter. I carried them both to the truck with the rain running off my hat. I turned the heater to maximum. I drove straight to a small urgent care clinic 3 miles down the road on Telegraph Boulevard. And while a kind nurse named Sarah wrapped baby Lily in a warm blue hospital blanket and brought Grace a paper cup of hot chicken broth and a granola bar, the whole story finally came pouring out of my daughter. And every single sentence broke a piece of me I did not know could still be broken. Grace had discovered she was pregnant in April, 6 months after her wedding day. She had been overjoyed. Marcus had been furious with her. He had told her that a baby would ruin his career trajectory, that he was not ready to be a father to anyone, that she had trapped him deliberately. Over the summer months, his moods had grown darker and colder. He had begun to control every single thing in her life: her phone, her bank accounts, her car keys, her friendships. He had convinced her that her father was a bitter, sick, angry old man who wanted nothing to do with her new life. He had told her that her mother Helen would have been ashamed of the woman she had become. He had cut her off from the hospital nursing job she loved by convincing her boss she was leaving to become a full-time mother. He had quietly moved money out of her personal savings account, an account her mother Helen had opened for her when Grace was 3 years old and had contributed to every single birthday until the day she died. Marcus had drained that whole account down to zero. $68,000, money Helen had put aside one paycheck at a time, sometimes $40, sometimes $100, always with a small handwritten card tucked into the envelope that said the same 3 words in her careful handwriting: for our girl. 2 weeks after Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl she named Lily Helen Whitmore, Marcus had come home from a business trip and told her he was filing for divorce, that he had already met someone else, that Grace and the baby were free to go start over somewhere else. That was not his problem. He had loaded her 2 suitcases into the trunk of his silver German sedan. He had driven her 90 miles north to Toledo. He had pulled into the parking lot of that discount grocery store on Route 20. He had handed her a folded $20 bill and 1 can of powdered formula, and he had driven away without looking back one single time in the rearview mirror. Grace had spent the last 11 days sleeping on that milk crate and in a bus station bathroom 2 blocks away. She had used the $20 to buy a small can of formula, a package of diapers, and a plastic bottle of water. She had been begging strangers for the rest. I sat in the plastic chair beside the exam table where Grace held little Lily, and I listened without interrupting even once. And when she was finally finished, when the last of the shaking had left her thin shoulders, I stood up. I walked out to the hallway. I took out my phone, and I called an old friend of mine named Charles Bennett. Charles was a retired federal prosecutor who lived in Indianapolis. He had worked with me on 3 joint investigations back in the 1990s, and he owed me exactly 1 favor from a long time ago. I told Charles the whole story in 6 clean minutes standing in that clinic hallway. Charles listened without a word. When I was finished, Charles said very quietly through the phone, "Daniel, I am going to need you to breathe for a minute. And then I am going to need you to trust me completely on this. Because what you have just described to me is not a divorce case. What you have just described to me is a series of serious state and federal crimes: fraudulent transfer of funds, financial abuse, abandonment, possibly false imprisonment. Do not confront him yet. Not 1 word. Give me 72 hours. I took Grace and baby Lily back to Millbrook that same night. I laid Grace down in her old childhood bedroom, the one Helen had painted pale yellow when Grace was 4 years old, with the little white curtains Helen had sewn from an old bedsheet. I laid baby Lily beside her mother in a soft nest of pillows. I sat down in the wooden rocking chair in the corner of that room, and I watched my daughter and my granddaughter sleep. Chester lay stretched across the doorway like an old sentinel. Outside the window, the November wind moved through the bare oak trees. Somewhere far off across the fields, a freight train whistle sounded low and long into the night, and I thought about Helen. I thought about her sitting up in that hospital bed the last week of her life, holding my hand tight in both of hers, telling me that if anything ever happened to me first, she would have wanted me to promise her that I would never let anyone hurt our girl. I had promised her that night. I had failed on that promise, and now I was going to make it right no matter what it cost me. The next morning, at first gray light, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed for the first time in 20 years. My old service uniform was folded neatly on top. Beneath the uniform were my citations, my medals, my badge, and a small brown leather folder that contained my final Army Criminal Investigation Division credentials. I did not put the uniform back on. I did not need to. I took out the leather folder. I placed it flat on the kitchen table beside my coffee mug. I sat down and I made a list. The list was 7 items long. It was written in the same careful block handwriting I had used my whole career, front to back. Each item on the list was a step. Each step had a deadline. Each deadline carried a consequence. I placed the list next to my coffee mug and I said out loud to Chester and to Helen and to nobody in particular in the empty kitchen, "Silence is only golden when it is guarding the truth. Time to guard the truth." Charles called me back 70 hours later. Charles had done exactly what Charles said he would do. Marcus Whitmore was not really a wealth manager at all. Marcus Whitmore was the founder of a small unregistered investment fund that had been quietly moving client money into an offshore account for the last 4 years running. The federal task force in Indianapolis had been circling his firm for 11 months. What they had been missing all that time was a cooperating witness. What they had been missing was a clean paper trail from inside his personal accounts. Charles had contacts on the task force. Charles had made the calls. And Charles had one single question for me. "Daniel, would your daughter Grace be willing to sit down with 2 federal agents and 1 federal prosecutor and give a formal sworn statement about the money that was moved out of her personal savings account?" I asked Grace at the kitchen table that afternoon while Lily slept in a bassinet on the floor beside us. Grace listened all the way through. She thought for a long time without speaking, staring at her folded hands. And she looked up at me with her mother's steady green eyes and she said, "Dad, he took the money Mom left for me. He took the money Mom saved every single payday of her whole life for me. Yes, I will sit with them. I will tell them every single thing." Grace gave her formal statement 3 days later at a federal building in downtown Indianapolis. The interview lasted 4 hours. She was calm, precise, and complete. She provided them with bank records, screenshots, text messages, and a small brown leather notebook she had kept hidden inside a diaper box for the last 2 months of her marriage. That notebook contained dates, dollar amounts, and direct quotes she had written down in her own hand. When the lead agent, a woman named Emma Reed, finally finished reading through the whole notebook, she looked across the table at my daughter and she said, "Mrs. Whitmore, this is the most well-documented account of financial coercion I have seen in 12 years on this job." The federal indictment came down 8 days after Grace gave her statement. Marcus was arrested at his office in downtown Indianapolis on a cold, rainy Wednesday morning in front of his entire staff of 9 employees. The charges included wire fraud, money laundering, and interstate transportation of stolen property. His bail was set at $2 million cash. His firm collapsed inside of 48 hours from the moment of the arrest. His silver German sedan was seized as an asset connected to fraudulent activity, but I was not finished with him yet. 2 weeks after his arrest, I drove up alone to Indianapolis and I paid a visit to Marcus Whitmore in the county jail. I sat across from him at a scratched metal table in a small gray visitation room with buzzing fluorescent lights that hummed like a nest of insects overhead. He looked smaller inside the Orange County jumpsuit. His jaw had lost its sharpness. His eyes had lost their easy shine. He looked at me across the table and he tried one last time to summon that easy, charming smile that had worked on my daughter and on every doorman he had ever met. It did not work this time. His lip trembled instead. "Daniel, sir, please, let me explain." I laid a manila folder on the table between us. I opened it slowly. I slid 3 separate documents across the metal surface toward him. Marcus. This first document is a civil suit filed by my daughter, Grace Hayes, no longer Whitmore, on behalf of herself and our granddaughter, Lily. It seeks recovery of the full $68,000 stolen from her savings account, plus punitive damages of $250,000 for financial abuse and abandonment of a minor. This second document is a permanent restraining order barring you from any contact with Grace or Lily for the rest of your natural life. This third document is a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. You will sign that third document today. You will sign it right now. Or the federal prosecutor's office will receive a supplementary sworn witness statement from me personally regarding a phone conversation I happened to overhear between you and a colleague of yours 11 months ago at my daughter's birthday dinner. That conversation, Marcus, was about a set of transactions I do not think you want the federal task force to know I heard. Marcus stared at me across the table. His face went white as milk. You were at that dinner. I was at that dinner. You heard. I heard every word. He picked up the pen with a shaking hand. His fingers were trembling so hard the pen kept slipping from his grip against the metal table. He signed all 3 documents. When he was done signing, he looked up at me with tears streaming down both cheeks. Daniel, in my own way, I loved her. I loved her. I collected the papers slowly. I put them back inside the folder. I stood up from the metal chair. And I said the only 3 sentences I had left to say to him for the rest of my life: Marcus, in my own way, I have spent 40 years learning the difference between love and ownership. What you did to my daughter was not love. What you did to my daughter was theft. I walked out of that visitation room. I never saw Marcus Whitmore with my own eyes again. The federal trial concluded 8 months later in the middle of a hot July. Marcus was sentenced to 14 years in a federal prison down in Kentucky. The civil suit was settled out of court by his family for the full amount plus the damages. Every single penny of Grace's original savings was returned to a brand new account we opened in little Lily's name. Helen's money would reach her granddaughter after all, across all those years, across everything that had tried to steal it. Grace and Lily moved back to Millbrook the week after the trial ended. They live with me in the little white farmhouse now. Grace went back into nursing, taking a job at the small county hospital 15 minutes down the road from our house. Every morning, she gets Lily dressed and ready for the church daycare, and she drops her off, and she works her shift, and she comes home at 5 in the evening. Every Sunday afternoon, we 3 make pot roast the way Helen taught her, with the pearl onions cut in half and the carrots left whole and a loaf of soft bread warming in the oven. Chester lets little Lily pull his gray ears without ever complaining once. My granddaughter is 2 years old now. She has her mother's steady green eyes and her grandmother's laugh and my stubborn jaw. She calls me Grandpa Danny, and she brings me dandelions from the yard every afternoon and puts them in a jelly jar of water on the kitchen windowsill. She does not know yet what her mother went through to bring her home safe. Someday, when she is old enough to hear it, we will tell her. She will know the whole story of the woman she was named after, my Helen, whose quiet love reached across all those long years to save her. I go down to the Veterans Breakfast at the American Legion Post on 3rd Street every Thursday morning now. I did not go for the first 10 years after Helen died. I go now. I sit with the old men and we drink strong black coffee and we talk about weather and hunting seasons and grandchildren and the things we can still remember. Charles Bennett drives up from Indianapolis twice a year and we go fishing together on the river north of town. Life has grown gentle around the edges of things again. Last Sunday evening in the middle of August, Grace came out to sit with me on the back porch after little Lily had finally fallen asleep upstairs. Grace brought 2 chipped mugs of chamomile tea. She sat down in the wooden chair beside mine and she looked out over the yard where the fireflies were rising in the warm summer dark. Dad, yeah, honey, do you think Mom would be proud of me? I turned to look at my daughter beside me. Her face was full again. Her cheeks had color. Her wrists had healed. Her eyes were her mother's eyes shining back at me. Grace, your mother would have been proud of you every single day she was alive, and she is proud of you every single day since she left us. And I want to tell you something else, honey. When I was a young man, I thought strength was the size of your fist. When I was a soldier, I thought strength was the courage to stand between other people and a bullet. But your mother, she taught me something before she died, and it took me until that gray afternoon in a Toledo parking lot to finally understand what she meant. Real strength, honey, is not what you do when the whole world is watching you perform. Real strength is what you do when the person you love the most has become completely invisible to the world, and you decide, alone, quietly, without anyone applauding, that you will not let them stay that way one more day. Real strength is showing up in a parking lot in the freezing rain and picking up somebody who cannot pick themselves back up. Real strength is the quiet fathers and the quiet mothers all across this country who never stop watching for their children, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many miles come between them, no matter how many terrible lies get told in the dark. Real strength is a love that simply refuses to stop looking for the ones it belongs to. Grace was crying quietly by the time I finished speaking. She reached over and she took my old hand and her young one. Chester came out onto the porch and lay down between our feet with a soft groan. Somewhere out in the yard, a whippoorwill called into the warm summer night. If this story stayed with you tonight, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone who once loved you quietly across a distance too long to name out loud, please share this video with them tonight while you are still thinking about it. Subscribe to this channel so that you never miss another story like this one. And leave a comment down below telling me the moment in this story that hits you the hardest in the chest. Sometimes the people who need these words the most only find them because someone brave enough to care hit the share button. Stay strong out there. Protect the people you love with everything you have. Never stop looking for them. And I will see you again in the next story.